The air inside Abbey Road Studios was thick with history and tension. It was supposed to be a celebration, a private gathering of rock legends to commemorate the studio's 90th anniversary. Paul McCartney was telling stories about the Beatles' recording sessions. Jimmy Page was quietly nursing a whiskey in the corner. David Gilmour stood near the piano where The Long and Winding Road was born. But Roger Waters wasn't interested in nostalgia. His eyes were locked on one man across the room, Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy sat with Sharon, completely unaware of the storm brewing. At 74, he looked remarkably content, clean, sober, and genuinely happy to be surrounded by his peers. He wore a simple black shirt and jeans, nothing flashy, no costume, no theatrics. Just a man who had survived everything the music industry could throw at him. This simplicity infuriated Waters. "Look at him," Waters muttered to music journalist Martin Clark, who was covering the event. "Sitting there like he belongs with real artists." Clark shifted uncomfortably. Waters had been drinking steadily for the past hour, and his famous arrogance was reaching dangerous levels. "Roger," Clark said carefully, "maybe we should—" "No," Waters cut him off, his voice sharp. "Someone needs to say what everyone's thinking. That man destroyed rock music." Roger Waters had never gotten over it. In the 1970s, while Pink Floyd was crafting complex concept albums about alienation and social commentary, Black Sabbath was creating something entirely different, raw, powerful, and undeniably authentic. While Waters was writing elaborate rock operas for intellectual audiences, Ozzy was screaming the pain of the working class. The numbers told a story Waters refused to accept. Black Sabbath's Paranoid had sold over 4 million copies. Pink Floyd's The Wall had sold more, but it took elaborate stage productions and intellectual pretension to achieve it. Ozzy's music succeeded because it was honest. Waters succeeded because it was clever. But what really ate at Waters was what happened after the bands broke up. Pink Floyd had imploded in legal battles, with Waters at the center of every conflict. He'd spent decades fighting his former bandmates over the name, the rights, and the legacy. Meanwhile, Ozzy had maintained friendships with his Black Sabbath colleagues, married Sharon, raised a family, and continued touring the world. Waters' solo career had been commercially disappointing. His last album sold 180,000 copies worldwide. Ozzy's latest album had gone platinum. This wasn't just about music anymore. This was about who had lived their life better. And tonight, surrounded by legends who genuinely respected Ozzy, Waters couldn't take it anymore. "Ozzy!" Waters' voice cut through the room like a knife. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Even Paul McCartney looked up from his conversation with producer George Martin. Ozzy glanced over, surprised but not alarmed. "All right, Roger?" Waters walked across the room with purpose, his wine glass in hand, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "I have to ask you something," Waters said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you ever feel guilty about what you did to rock music?" The room fell silent. Jimmy Page set down his drink. David Gilmour stepped closer, recognizing the dangerous edge in his former bandmate's voice. Ozzy's eyebrows raised slightly. "What do I mean by what, mate?" "You turned art into a circus," Waters said, his voice growing louder. "While we were creating meaningful music, music that made people think, that challenged society, you were biting the heads off bats and pretending it was art." Sharon touched Ozzy's arm, a silent warning, but Ozzy remained calm. "Roger," Ozzy said gently, "we all found our own way to connect with people." "Connect?" Waters laughed bitterly. "You call mindless entertainment connecting? Pink Floyd created The Wall, a masterpiece about education, war, and alienation. What did you create? Iron Man? A cartoon character?" The attack was designed to humiliate, to reduce Ozzy to a caricature in front of his peers. Waters expected embarrassment, maybe anger. He got neither. Instead, Ozzy stood up slowly, his expression completely calm. "Roger," Ozzy said quietly, "do you know where I grew up?" Waters blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I grew up in Aston, Birmingham," Ozzy continued, his voice steady but carrying to every corner of the room. "My dad worked in a steel factory. My mom cleaned houses at night so we could eat. We had no money, no connections, no art school education." Waters' confident smirk began to fade. I left school at 15 to work in a slaughterhouse because my family needed the money, Ozzy went on. Every day I killed cattle and pigs. The smell of blood never left my hands. I was a nobody from nowhere with nothing. The room was dead silent now. Even the staff had stopped moving. You went to Cambridge, didn't you, Roger? Ozzy asked, though he already knew the answer. Middle-class family, private education, all the advantages I never had. Waters opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. When we started Black Sabbath, no one gave us a chance, Ozzy continued, his voice gaining strength. We weren't clever enough for the critics. We weren't pretty enough for the pop charts. We were just four working-class kids from Birmingham who learned to play instruments. Paul McCartney was nodding slightly. He understood this story. The Beatles had faced similar class barriers. But you know what we did, Roger? We created something that didn't exist before. Heavy metal, a whole new genre of music. We gave voice to people like us, people who felt powerless, angry and forgotten. Waters tried to interrupt. But the artistic merit, Ozzy's voice sharpened for the first time. Let me tell you about artistic merit, mate. Iron Man wasn't about a cartoon character, Ozzy said, his eyes locked on Waters. It was about dehumanization, about working-class people being treated like machines, about soldiers coming home from war and not being recognized as human beings anymore. David Gilmour's eyes widened. He'd never heard this interpretation before. Paranoid was about mental illness at a time when no one talked about it. Ozzy continued, I was writing about anxiety, depression, and feeling like an outsider because I lived it every day. Waters' face had gone pale. Children of the Grave was about nuclear war and what we were leaving for future generations. War Pigs was about politicians sending poor kids to die. In wars, they'd never fight themselves. Jimmy Page was leaning forward now, completely absorbed. Every song we wrote came from real pain, real experience, real fear, Ozzy said. We weren't clever enough to hide it behind metaphors and concept albums. We just screamed it out loud. Waters tried to salvage his argument. But the spectacle, the theatrics, the spectacle? Ozzy almost smiled. Roger, do you know how many people have told me our music saved their lives? Not entertained them, saved them. From suicide, from addiction, from giving up entirely. The room was riveted. A kid from Detroit writes to tell me shot in the dark got him through his father's death. A veteran from Texas says Diary of a Madman helped him understand his PTSD. A mother from London says, Mama, I'm coming home, gave her hope when her son was deployed. Waters was staring at the floor now. That's not spectacle, Roger. That's connection. That's what music is supposed to do. Ozzy paused, looking around the room at the faces of his peers, all listening intently. You want to talk about artistic success? Ozzy said, his voice softer now, but somehow more devastating. Let's talk about it. Waters braced himself. How many people came to your last solo tour, Roger? Ozzy asked. I heard it was half-empty venues. Meanwhile, I'm still selling out stadiums at 74 years old. The truth hit Waters like a physical blow. You know why? Ozzy continued. Because I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot who I was playing for. Every night, I look out at that audience and see kids like I used to be, angry, lost, looking for something real. Waters tried to speak, but Ozzy wasn't finished. You created music for critics and intellectuals, Ozzy said. I created music for people who needed it. You built walls between yourself and your audience. I tore them down. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone in the room. And one more thing, Roger, Ozzy said, delivering the final blow with surgical precision. You couldn't even keep your own band together. Pink Floyd broke up because of your ego. Meanwhile, Tony, Geezer, and Bill are still my friends. Sharon and I have been married for 40 years. My kids love me. Waters was visibly shaking now. Music isn't about proving how smart you are, Ozzy concluded. It's about proving how human you are. The silence that followed lasted exactly 7 seconds. Then Paul McCartney began to clap, slowly, deliberately, with genuine respect. Jimmy Page joined in, then David Gilmour, Waters' own former bandmate. Then everyone in the room was applauding, not just for what Ozzy had said, but for how he'd said it, with dignity, with truth, with the wisdom that comes from surviving everything life can throw at you. Roger Waters stood alone in the center of the room, completely humiliated. Without a word, he set down his wine glass and walked toward the exit. No one followed him. No one said goodbye. As the door closed behind him, Ozzy sat back down next to Sharon, took her hand, and continued his conversation as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something profound. In 5 minutes, Ozzy Osbourne had dismantled decades of musical snobbery and reminded everyone in that room what rock music was really about. Truth, pain, connection, and the courage to be vulnerable in front of strangers. The story leaked within 24 hours. Music journalists who weren't even at the event began calling it the Abbey Road revelation. Videos from guests' phones circulated on social media. Hashtag Ozzy versus Waters trended worldwide. But the real impact wasn't in the headlines. Young musicians who heard the story learned something important. Authenticity beats intellectualism. Heart beats head. Connection beats cleverness. Roger Waters didn't give interviews for 3 months afterward. When he finally spoke to Rolling Stone, he was asked about the incident at Abbey Road. No comment, he said. Meanwhile, Ozzy's next tour sold out in record time. At every show, he dedicated Iron Man to everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. The crowd sang louder than ever. 6 months later, at a charity event in Los Angeles, a young musician approached Ozzy backstage. "Mr. Osbourne," the kid said nervously, "I heard about what happened with Roger Waters at Abbey Road." "Yeah," Ozzy said, signing the kid's guitar. "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm from a poor family and I always felt like I wasn't smart enough to make real music. But after hearing your story, I realized that being real is more important than being clever." Ozzy looked up from the guitar and smiled. The same genuine smile that had carried him through 50 years in the music business. "That's all any of us can be, mate," he said. "Real." As the young musician walked away, Sharon squeezed Ozzy's hand. "Think Roger learned anything from that night?" she asked. Ozzy shrugged. "Probably not. But that's okay. Sometimes the lesson isn't for the person you're teaching. Who's it for then? Everyone else who's listening." That night at Abbey Road Studios became legendary in music circles, but not for the reasons Roger Waters intended. It became a story about humility defeating arrogance, about authenticity trumping pretension, about working-class wisdom silencing intellectual snobbery. Most importantly, it became a reminder that the greatest art doesn't come from trying to prove how smart you are. It comes from having the courage to show how human you are. Roger Waters had tried to diminish Ozzy Osbourne by attacking his artistic credibility. Instead, he had given Ozzy the perfect platform to demonstrate something far more valuable: the difference between being an artist and being a human being who makes art. In the end, there was no contest. The Prince of Darkness had won by simply being real. And in the world of rock and roll, being real is the only thing that matters. The lesson from Abbey Road Studios that night was simple. You can have all the education, all the clever lyrics, and all the critical acclaim in the world. But if you don't have heart, you have nothing. And heart is something that can't be taught, bought, or faked. You either have it or you don't. Ozzy Osbourne had it. Roger Waters learned he didn't.